My name is Reece Callahan, though the people I served with in the Army Corps of Engineers knew me by a different name. They called me Anchor. I'm 31 years old, a former combat engineer and now a structural integrity consultant for the federal government. I spent 8 years calculating load tolerances and blast-resistant designs in places most people will never see on a map. None of that prepared me for what happened on the Harlow Creek Bridge on a Wednesday afternoon in October. It started the way most disasters do, quietly, with someone who should have known better making a decision they were certain about. My older brother, Derek, and I hadn't been in the same room for 4 years before that day. We'd grown up close enough. 2 kids in a modest house in rural Ohio, our father a union electrician, our mother a school librarian. But Derek had gotten out, gotten a degree from Ohio State in finance, married into a family with property in 3 states, and somewhere in the process decided that the rest of us, me especially, had stayed small. When I enlisted at 22 instead of taking the marketing job he'd arranged to his father-in-law, he called it throwing my life away. When I deployed twice and came back with a military occupational specialty in structural demolition and bridge assessment, he called it blowing things up for the government. When I told him I'd taken a consulting contract with the Army Corps and was making more than he expected, he said, "That's nice, Reece, but it's not real engineering." He had a way of making everything sound like a compliment that wasn't. The occasion that brought us together was our father's 72nd birthday. My mother had planned a trip. The whole family, Derek and his wife, their 2 kids, me, and my parents, to spend the weekend at a rented cabin in the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania. It was the kind of trip my mother had been talking about for years, and she had finally made it happen. I drove up from D.C. Derek flew into Pittsburgh and rented a luxury SUV. The cabin sat on the far side of a 2-lane county road that crossed over Harlow Creek on a single-span bridge. The bridge had been built in 1961 and posted at a 10-ton weight limit. I noticed the sign on the way in. I always notice those signs. Old habit, you look at a bridge the way a doctor looks at a patient who hasn't had a checkup in a while. On the second day, Derek decided he wanted to drive everyone into the nearest town for dinner rather than cook at the cabin. The nearest restaurant he considered acceptable was 40 minutes away, and the road in went over that same bridge. He'd booked a larger passenger van through some local rental service for the occasion, one of those 15-passenger Sprinter types that corporate groups use. I looked at the van when it arrived. Then I looked at the bridge weight limit sign I'd seen on the way in. I did the math in my head the way I'd done it 1,000 times on deployments. Vehicle weight, passenger load, gear, distributed stress across a span of that age, and likely that construction type. I said, "Derek, we shouldn't take this van over that bridge." He didn't even look up from his phone. "It'll be fine. The bridge is posted at 10 tons. That van, fully loaded with all of us, is going to be right at the limit. Bridges that age have hidden deterioration you can't see from the road." He finally looked up then, and the expression on his face was one I'd seen 100 times growing up. Patient condescension. The look he reserved for when he thought I was being dramatic. "Reece," he said, "you spent your career blowing things up. I don't think that makes you a bridge inspector." My mother touched my arm. She had that expression she gets when she wants everyone to just get along, please. I said it again, quieter. "I'm asking you to take the cars separately. 2 trips. It adds 30 minutes. Derek shook his head, and the way he said the next part, not loud, almost casual, was what stayed with me. "You've been out of the field for 2 years. You're a desk consultant. This isn't Afghanistan, Reece. It's a county road in Pennsylvania." He turned to my father. "Dad, you ready?" My father looked at me. I could see he wasn't sure. But Derek was already moving toward the van, and the moment passed. The way moments do when the loudest person in the room keeps moving. I got in. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself civilian infrastructure wasn't combat zone infrastructure, that the county maintained these roads, that thousands of people probably cross that bridge every month. I was watching the creek through the window when it happened. Not a collapse. Not a dramatic failure the way you see in movies. It was a sound first, a low metallic groan beneath us, the kind of sound that shouldn't exist in a functioning structure, and then the right rear corner of the bridge deck dropped 4 inches, fast and hard, like a table leg giving out. The van lurched sideways. My mother screamed. Derek hit the brakes instinctively, which was the wrong thing to do. Panic braking on a compromised span transfers load unevenly and accelerates failure. I was unbuckled before I registered deciding to move. "Get off the brakes," I said loudly and clearly, the way you talk in a situation where you need someone to hear you through their own panic. "Derek, release the brakes. Ease forward. Do it now." He turned to look at me. "Ease forward. Release the brakes and ease forward. The span is partially failing on the right. You need to redistribute the load to the left and keep moving. If you stop, we sink." There was a half second, one of those half seconds that lasts its own small lifetime, where I could see him deciding whether to listen to me. His hands were white on the steering wheel. His jaw was tight. He released the brakes. "Ease forward. Slow. Steady. Don't accelerate. Don't brake. Hold the left lane." The van crept forward. Underneath us, the groan of stressed metal continued, a sound I will hear for the rest of my life in certain quiet rooms. Another drop, smaller this time, maybe 2 inches on the same corner. My father had his eyes closed. My mother was gripping my niece's hand. Derek's wife was rigid in the passenger seat, not making a sound. The front wheels reached solid road on the far side. "Keep going," I said. "Don't stop until you're clear of the abutment, another 30 feet. He kept going. The rear wheels cleared the bridge. Derek pulled off onto the gravel shoulder and stopped, and for a moment nobody in the van moved or spoke. Then the right rear corner of the bridge deck, the section we'd been sitting over 40 seconds ago, gave way completely. Concrete and rusted rebar dropped into Harlow Creek with a sound like a controlled demolition, only no one had controlled it. Derek turned around in his seat and looked at me. His face had no expression I could name. My niece, who is 7, said, "Uncle Reece, what was that sound?" I said, "The bridge decided it was tired." I called 911. I called the County Road Commission. I took photographs of the failure point from a safe distance and recorded a voice memo with my observations: span age, estimated load at time of crossing, visible rebar corrosion on the exposed failure surface, the direction and extent of the deck collapse. Old habit, you document what you find, even when your hands are still slightly unsteady. The county road officer who arrived 40 minutes later was a man named Earl, weathered and unhurried. The kind of person who'd seen the slow decline of rural infrastructure up close for 30 years. He looked at my photographs on my phone and then looked at me with a question in his expression. "Former Army Corps," I said. "Structural assessment." He nodded slowly. "You got lucky." "We got lucky because someone slowed the brakes and redistributed load," I said. I wasn't trying to be precise about credit. I was trying to be accurate about what happened, which is a different thing. Earl looked at the collapsed section, then back at me. "That bridge has been on our watch list for 6 years. Budget kept pushing the inspection back." I wrote that down too. What nobody talks about in the immediate aftermath of something like that is the silence that falls inside a family. We were all physically uninjured. We drove back to the cabin in the cars separately, which was what I'd said we should do in the first place. My mother made tea. My father sat at the kitchen table for a long time without saying anything. Derek didn't speak to me for the rest of that evening. It wasn't until late that night, after the kids were asleep and my parents had gone to bed, that he came and sat across from me on the porch. He had a beer he wasn't really drinking, just turning in his hands. The creek was audible in the distance, moving the way it always does, indifferent. "How did you know?" he said. Not "I'm sorry." Not "you were right." "How did you know?" I thought about how to answer that. I could have been short about it. I could have set the math, or the sign, or 8 years of looking at structures that people's lives depend on. But Derek wasn't asking a technical question. He was asking something harder than that. He was asking what the gap was between what he thought I did and what I actually did. "Load math," I said. "Vehicle weight, passenger load, posted limit, span age, and the sound the deck made when we drove in 2 days ago. It had a particular resonance. I cataloged it and I didn't trust it." He was quiet for a while. I said, "You were a desk consultant." You did. I said this wasn't your field. You did. He looked at his beer. I didn't know what your field was. I don't think I ever asked. That sentence landed differently than an apology would have. An apology is something you receive. That sentence was something he had to give himself, and it cost him something to do it. And I respected that even though it was too late and also not too late, the bridge story would have ended there, in the cabin in the Allegheny National Forest, except that Earl, the county road officer, had filed a report that morning that included my name and credentials. And within 48 hours, someone at the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation had run my background. A week after I got back to D.C., I received a formal request to consult on an accelerated inspection of 11 similar spans in that county, all built in the same era, all on the same deferred maintenance schedule. I said yes. The inspection took 6 weeks and identified 3 additional bridges with critical structural deficiencies, 2 of which were temporarily closed and fast-tracked for replacement. The third had a remediation that could extend its life by 15 years if done within the next 18 months. I wrote a report. I presented it to the county commissioners in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, and I told them exactly what I told Derek, that the math doesn't lie, and the metal will tell you what it knows if you know how to listen. One of the commissioners asked me afterward if I'd grown up in the area. I told her no. But my father had driven across bridges like this his whole life to get to work, and so had his father, and I thought that counted for something. The deeper story, the one underneath the bridge, had started years before that October afternoon, and it started with a piece of paper that wasn't mine to share. When I'd come home from my second deployment, I went through a period that I didn't have a clean name for at the time. I know now it was transition-related anxiety. The specific variety that hits engineers and tacticians especially hard because your mind keeps running calculations in environments where the variables have changed and the stakes feel lower, and somehow that makes it worse. I saw a counselor through the VA. I was honest with her, which is what they tell you to do, and what I would tell anyone else to do. I was put on a short course of medication for anxiety. I tapered off it in 4 months. I completed all my follow-up appointments. The record was closed. I thought it was private. It was technically private, but somehow Derek had gotten hold of a summary, not the full record, but enough of a summary to know that I'd been treated for anxiety following deployment. I found out about this not because he told me, but because 18 months before the bridge incident, when our father had mentioned updating his estate documents and whether I might be involved in any fiduciary capacity, Derek had said something to a family attorney about my history of psychological instability. My mother told me this. She told me quietly in a phone call, the way she tells me the things she thinks I should know, but hasn't figured out how to protect me from. She told me Derek had said he was worried about me. She told me the attorney had noted in correspondence. I did not say anything to Derek about it. I wrote it down. Date, source, exact wording as my mother recalled it. I put the page in a folder I keep in my filing cabinet, the same place I keep copies of my discharge papers, my certifications, my completed VA records. I'm an engineer. I believe in documentation the way some people believe in prayer. You keep the records because the records exist whether or not you keep them, and the ones who organize theirs are the ones who can speak clearly when the time comes. The estate situation had simmered in the background for 2 years. My father's assets were modest but not nothing. The house, a life insurance policy, some municipal bonds he'd bought quietly over 30 years because he didn't trust the stock market, a small rental property in Columbus. Derek had been pushing for a structure that would put him in a primary trustee role, managing everything, with me in what he described as a beneficiary-only position. He had prepared documents. He had an attorney. He spoke about it with the confidence of someone who has already decided the outcome and is only waiting for everyone else to acknowledge it. My father is not a confrontational man. He loves both of his children. He wanted peace more than he wanted precision. And for a long time, that meant Derek's version of the plan was moving forward by default. I had a different attorney. A woman I'd found through a colleague, careful and unhurried and not remotely impressed by the other side's paperwork. I'd shown her the folder. She'd looked at it for a long time without speaking, and then she'd said, he used a private medical record summary to raise a competency question with the estate attorney. Yes, I said, and your full VA record shows complete resolution and full return to professional function. Yes, and your current professional certifications and federal consulting contracts are all current. Yes. Then let him file whatever he's going to file, she said. We'll let the record answer. I want to be honest about what happened inside me during those 2 years. I'm not someone who processes anger in a loud way. I don't have a breaking point that looks like a breaking point from the outside. What I have is a kind of cold clarity that comes in when the stakes get high enough. The same thing that makes me good in a damaged structure. The ability to see what's actually there instead of what you wish were there. When I found out Derek had used my VA counseling record against me, I didn't feel rage. I felt something more like a precise and total focus, the way a scope eye becomes your whole world when you're reading a field measurement. I had been patient. I had documented. I had let the math exist in the folder, and when the bridge collapsed in Harlow Creek, the math began to speak. The bridge incident made the local news, and then a regional outlet picked it up, and then a journalist at a Pittsburgh paper who covered infrastructure and public safety spent 3 weeks reporting a longer piece on deferred bridge maintenance in Pennsylvania. She interviewed me twice. I was careful, factual, and I said only what I could document. I did not mention my family. I did not mention Derek. I talked about load ratings and inspection cycles and the federal funding gap in rural transportation infrastructure. The article ran on a Sunday. By Monday evening, it had been shared widely enough that my father's estate attorney, the one Derek had filed the original documents with, had read it. I know this because my attorney told me he called her office to ask a clarifying question about my current professional status. The competency question disappeared from the estate documents within 2 weeks. I didn't celebrate that. It wasn't a victory in any way that felt like victory. It was just the record catching up to the story someone else had tried to tell about me. The probate process took another 4 months. Derek pushed back on several provisions, not aggressively but persistently, the way he does everything. My attorney answered each one with documents. At one point, Derek's attorney raised the matter of my VA treatment directly, formally, in a written filing. My attorney submitted my complete VA record, my federal clearances, my active consulting contracts, and a letter from the regional PennDOT director regarding my role in the bridge inspection project. Derek's attorney withdrew the filing. Derek and I sat across from each other in a conference room in Columbus on a Thursday morning in February, 6 weeks after the Pennsylvania trip. The room was the same temperature as rooms like that always are. Slightly too cold, slightly too formal, the kind of space designed to keep everyone a little off balance. His attorney was there. Mine was there. My parents were not there. I had asked my mother, specifically, not to come. Derek looked tired. He looked the way people look when they've been fighting something and the fighting has cost them more than they expected. We signed the documents. The estate was divided as my father intended, cleanly, with both of us in equal standing. The rental property in Columbus would be managed by an independent trustee that both of us agreed on. Afterward, in the parking lot, Derek's attorney went to get the car. Derek and I stood on the sidewalk in the February cold. He had his hands in his coat pockets. I had mine in mine. The bridge, he said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. You listened, I said. That mattered. I called you a desk consultant. He said it the way you say a thing when you need to hear yourself say it. Not for my benefit. You did. I used your record against you. I looked at him. You did. He didn't apologize, not directly. Derek isn't built for direct apologies. Not because he's cruel, but because he was raised in the same family I was, in the same culture of men who handle things by handling things, and saying I'm sorry out loud still feels to him like bleeding in public. What he said instead was, I'm going to do better. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I'm going to do better. I thought about that for a moment. In the cold, with the February sky doing what February skies do. Okay, I said. I didn't forgive him to give him something. I decided to stop carrying what he'd done, because carrying it was heavier than putting it down. And I've spent enough of my career learning that dead weight will take a structure down eventually if you don't account for it in the design. We drove our separate cars home, 3 months later, I got a call from a former Army Corps colleague who'd moved into infrastructure policy work in Washington. There was a position opening, not a consulting contract, but a permanent staff role on the subcommittee on highways and transit, advising on rural bridge infrastructure specifically, the kind of role that could actually shift how federal dollars get allocated to the bridges that Earl had been watching deteriorate for 30 years. I thought about the woman at the county commissioner meeting who'd asked if I'd grown up nearby. I thought about my father, who had never in his life known that the bridge he drove over every morning to get to the job site had a load rating or a maintenance schedule or an inspection cycle, who had just driven, trusting that someone somewhere had done the math. I took the position. I still keep the folder. It has more in it now: the bridge inspection report, the PennDOT letter, the final estate documents, the withdrawn filing. I don't look at it often. It's not a trophy. It's a record, and records exist whether or not you keep them. I keep mine because I've learned that the truth, properly documented, does not need a loud voice. It needs a filing system and the patience to wait for the right room. The last thing I wrote in it was a line I put on a post-it and stuck to the inside cover, the same way I used to write equipment specs on tape and stick them to the inside of a field kit. It says, "The structure tells you what it knows. Your job is to listen first and speak when the room is ready." I'm still working on the second part. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to be heard by someone who has already decided not to listen. Not heard in the sense of acknowledged, that's easy to fake, but heard in the way where something shifts behind their eyes and they realize the story they've been telling about you is wrong. Derek didn't hear me when I told him the bridge was unsafe. He heard the words, technically. He processed them. And then he filed them under the category he'd built for me years ago: little sister, overreacts, doesn't understand how the real world works. That category was more comfortable than the math I was doing in my head, so he chose it. That's not a Derek problem specifically. That's a human problem. We all do it. We build filing systems for the people we love, and then we keep putting new information into old folders long after the folders stopped fitting. What I keep coming back to is this: the bridge didn't care what Derek thought of me. The steel didn't care about his opinion of my career. The load math didn't adjust itself to match his confidence. That's the thing about working with structures for 8 years. They are completely indifferent to what anyone believes. They respond only to what's real, and there's a kind of freedom in that. Once you understand it, you stop needing the other person to agree with your assessment. You just need the assessment to be correct. Time handles the rest. I don't think Derek is a bad person. I've had to be honest with myself about that, because it would be easier if he were. Bad people are simple. Derek is complicated in the way most people who hurt you are complicated. He was scared, and his fear made him small, and his smallness expressed itself as control. He used my VA record because he thought he might lose something. He called me unstable because it was easier than admitting I might be more capable than he'd accounted for in his plans. That's not malice. That's fear with a law degree. The cause and effect of all of it is pretty clean once you step back far enough to see it. He underestimated me, so he didn't listen. He didn't listen, so he almost got our family killed. The bridge fell anyway, the way the truth tends to eventually. And then there was nothing left to argue about. Not credentials, not competency, not whose version of me was accurate. Just 7 people in a van and a voice saying release the brakes and the choice of whether to listen or not. He listened. That matters. I want to be clear about that. It matters. Not because it erased anything, but because it was the decision that was available to him in that moment, and he made the right one. You can do years of damage and still, in a specific 30-second window, make the right call. Both things are true at once. What I want anyone to take from this, if they're carrying something similar, is that patience is not the same as passivity. I kept the folder. I kept the records. I did not fight every fight in real time because not every fight needs to happen in real time. Integrity is slow. Documentation is quiet. The work of building a true record of who you are, through your certifications, your choices, your professional conduct, the way you behave when lives are on the line. That work accumulates in ways that loud arguments never do. Derek's version of me couldn't survive contact with my actual record. It never could. I just had to wait for the room where the record got to speak. That's not revenge. I want to be honest about that too. There's no satisfaction in watching a bridge fall. There's no pleasure in being right about a danger you hoped you were wrong about. What there is, on the other side of all of it, is clarity. A clean sense of what you're made of, tested under conditions you didn't choose. And sometimes the person who doubted you gets a chance to see it too, and something changes in them. That's worth something. Not everything, but something. The folder is still in my filing cabinet. I don't open it often, but I keep it because I learned a long time ago that the truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be organized.